The Feast of Fools. In the heart of the kingdom of Gula stood a palace more gluttonous than grand. Its ceilings were gilded with syrup-colored chandeliers, its halls lined with golden platters, and at its center, on a throne padded with goose feathers and layered cakes, sat King Barlo the Big, the fattest king the realm had ever known. King Barlo's belly rolled over his silk robes like a mountain of dough. He prided himself on his size, believing it a symbol of strength and wealth. A fat king, he often proclaimed through a mouthful of meat, is a fed king. A fed king rules a rich land. Each evening, the castle's great dining hall echoed with music and laughter as Barlo hosted his infamous feasts. Dozens of servants rushed around him like bees around a honey pot, bringing roasted boar, buttered bread towers, and lakes of wine. Outside the gates, however, the air was still, and the people of Gula watched the smoke of roasted meats drift into the sky with hollow eyes and empty stomachs. Food had become scarce for the common folk. The king's insatiable hunger drained the storehouses. Farmers were taxed in grain, not gold. Bakers baked for the castle, not the village. Children cried from hunger while Barlo wiped grease from his chin with silk napkins. One such evening, as music played and servants danced for the king's amusement, a thin girl slipped through the palace kitchen window. Her name was Mira, the daughter of a poor farmer who had sold his last goat to pay the grain tax. She crept silently toward the pantry, her small fingers trembling as they reached for a loaf of bread. But before she could flee, 2 guards seized her. "Thief," one bellowed. "Bring her to the king," said the other. Moments later, Mira stood before the throne, still clutching the stolen bread. Her face was pale but defiant. The guests murmured, curious. "A peasant girl," Barlo drawled, licking honey from his fingers. "What do you call yourself, waif?" "Mira," she said. "I took the bread because we're starving. There's nothing left in the village." The hall fell silent. King Barlo narrowed his eyes and chuckled. "Starving? How amusing. You simply need to learn to eat like a king." Laughter erupted among the nobles. Mira raised her chin. "You eat like 10 kings, while 10,000 of us starve." The laughter stopped. Barlo's face darkened. "How dare you speak so to your king?" "You sit there, bloated and blind," she said, her voice steady. "You think fat means powerful, but it only means you've taken more than your share." The court gasped. Barlo's fingers tightened around his goblet. For a moment, silence weighed heavier than the chandeliers. Then, with a flick of his hand, he waved her away. "Throw her out," he muttered. "Let the cold teach her manners." The guards dragged Mira to the gates and tossed her into the street. The bread she'd stolen was crushed beneath her as she landed, but she didn't cry. She picked herself up and walked into the dark. That night, King Barlo lay in his massive bed, surrounded by velvet pillows and trays of midnight snacks. But for the first time in years, he couldn't sleep. Myra's words echoed in his ears. "You've taken more than your share." He turned over, still couldn't rest. And then, as the wind howled outside, he dreamed. In the dream, he stood before a hall of mirrors, each one showing a different version of himself. In one, he was as he saw himself, proud, strong, magnificent. In another, he was a grotesque balloon of flesh, wobbling with each step. Then came the last mirror. It showed a skeleton wearing his crown, sitting alone in a banquet hall filled with rotting food. The skeleton turned and spoke in Myra's voice. "You ate until there was nothing left for anyone else." Barlo woke up drenched in sweat, his hands trembling. For the first time in his reign, King Barlo didn't ask for breakfast. The mirror of truth. For the first time in years, King Barlo skipped his morning feast. His servants whispered behind their hands. The royal chefs stood idle, unsure whether to roast or retreat. But Barlo simply sat on his throne, staring at nothing, Myra's words echoing in his mind like a chant. "You've taken more than your share." Barlo summoned his oldest advisor, the royal wizard Garin, a man draped in dusty robes and older than the castle stones. "Garin," the king said, his voice lower than usual. "I need to see myself, not in a silver mirror or gold reflection. I want the truth." Garin studied the king's face. "There is such a thing, your majesty. But once seen, Truth cannot be unseen. I'll take that risk, Barlo replied, gripping the arms of his throne. That evening, Garin led Barlo down into the depths of the palace, through forgotten stone corridors and rusted gates. At last, they reached a locked chamber lit by a single flickering torch. Within it stood an old mirror, tall, cracked at the edges, its surface covered with a black cloth. This, Garin whispered, is the mirror of truth. It shows not what you are on the outside, but who you are within. Barlo hesitated, then pulled the cloth away. At first, he saw only darkness. Then, slowly, an image formed, and the king gasped. The man in the mirror was monstrous, bloated beyond reason, his skin pale and stretched, his eyes dull and cold. Flies buzzed around his food-stained robes. His crown tilted awkwardly on a greasy brow. Behind him, his subjects knelt in chains, gaunt and weary, reaching toward him with trembling hands. "No," Barlo muttered. "That's not me. That's not who I am." He turned away, but the image stayed fixed in his mind. The people he'd ignored, the pain he'd caused, the hunger he had fed with his own indulgence. It all came rushing in like floodwater breaching a dam. "This is what they see?" he asked, breathless. "No," Garin said quietly. "This is what you are when you close your eyes to the truth." Barlo's knees buckled. He fell to the ground, the room spinning. For the first time, he saw himself not as a king of wealth, but as a creature of appetite. "I never meant to harm them," he whispered. "Harm comes even when it's not meant," Garin replied. Barlo stared in the mirror once more. This time, he noticed something else. In the corner of the image stood Mira, holding a single piece of bread, offering it to a crying child. Her face was thin, but her posture was strong. Light seemed to shine around her. "The poor girl," Barlo said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I mocked her. I punished her. Yet she gives while I take." Garin nodded. "The heart of the kingdom is not in your throne room, sire. It is in the hands of people like her." Barlo turned from the mirror, his face pale. "Break it," he said. "I can't bear to see it anymore." "No, your majesty," Garin said. "Truth cannot be broken, only ignored." With that, the old wizard covered the mirror once more and left the king alone in the cold chamber. That night, Barlo sat at his table. The banquet was prepared, as always: roasted birds, jellied fruits, wheels of cheese, barrels of wine. But the king did not eat. He stared at the food, suddenly disgusted by the excess. The smell of gravy now turned his stomach. Every bite he had taken before now tasted bitter in memory. Instead, he walked the halls of the palace, silent and solemn. He passed by rooms filled with untouched treasure, storerooms overflowing with grain, and chambers where servants rested after preparing feasts they never tasted. He paused outside the kitchen. A boy no older than 10 was licking crumbs from a plate. Barlo stepped closer. The boy froze. "Are you hungry?" the king asked. The boy nodded, eyes wide. Barlo knelt, something he hadn't done in years, and handed him a full roll from the platter he carried. The boy stared at it, then at the king. "Thank you, your majesty." Barlo didn't respond. He only nodded and walked away, heavy with thought. That night, sleep eluded him again. But instead of dreaming of ghosts, he began to dream of change. The king who disappeared. At dawn, the servants entered the king's chamber to find the royal bed empty and the morning feast untouched. Panic erupted. Guards searched every corridor. The royal council convened in a frenzy. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed Barlo had been kidnapped. Others swore he had vanished into thin air. But none guessed the truth. King Barlo had walked out the palace gates in the clothes of a commoner. Wrapped in a dull brown cloak, with no crown, no guards, and only a satchel of bread and coins, Barlo passed unnoticed through the streets of Gula for the first time in his life. He walked with a limp from years of indulgence, his body groaning from every step. But he walked nonetheless. He needed to see the truth of his kingdom, not through windows or mirrors, but with his own eyes. The first village he visited was Harlow, once famed for its wheat fields. Now the fields lay fallow. Crops had withered, and many homes stood abandoned. At the well, a woman slapped a thin boy's hand away from her bucket. "Only enough for our family today," she snapped. Barlo stepped forward. He looks thirsty. The woman glared. And who are you to say? He hesitated. Just someone with water to share. From his satchel, he poured half of his own into the boy's cupped hands. The boy drank deeply, smiling. The woman, watching in silence, softened slightly and nodded her thanks. Barlo moved on, trading coins for small meals and sleeping in barns. Everywhere he went, he found the same pattern. Villages strained under harsh taxes, food hoarded by merchants, and people angry at a king they never saw. In Wren Hill, he tried to help dig an irrigation ditch, but collapsed after 10 minutes. "You're as useful as a pillow," a gruff farmer grunted, hauling him up. "Big as one, too." Barlo flushed, but said nothing. He had never been mocked to his face. He sat on a stump, wheezing, watching the others work. That evening, while the laborers shared thin stew, Barlo offered the last of his bread. A girl took it carefully. "You're not from here." "No," Barlo said. "Just traveling." "Then you should go see Mira," she replied. "She helps people, even strangers." Barlo's heart jolted. He hadn't heard Myra's name since she'd been thrown from his palace. He followed directions up a forest path to a clearing where tents had been pitched. At the center stood Mira, thinner than before, but confident and calm as she handed out food and medicine. She spotted him immediately, but did not recognize him. "You new here?" she asked, placing a warm roll in his hand. He looked at the bread. "Yes, thank you. You're lucky. We just got flour from a trader who owed me a favor. You'd be surprised how kindness returns if you give it a chance." Barlo looked around. The camp was poor, but it pulsed with quiet purpose. Children laughed. Elders rested without fear. People shared without being told. That night, around the campfire, Mira shared stories of villages she'd helped, of children she'd saved from hunger. Barlo listened, shamed and awed. The next morning, he sat across from her. "Mira," he said quietly, "do you remember the king who mocked you? Threw you into the street?" Her eyes narrowed. "I remember. I am that king." Silence fell. "I've walked my kingdom. I've seen what I refused to see. You were right. I had taken more than my share." Mira stared at him, searching for lies. He opened his satchel, offering the last of his coin. "It's not much, but I want to help. Not as a king, as a man trying to be better." She didn't take the coins. "If you go back to your palace and forget all this, your journey will have meant nothing." "I won't," he promised. "I can't." Mira finally nodded. "Then go back. Not as the fat king, but as the one who's willing to carry what others have long borne." Barlo bowed his head. By the time he returned to the palace days later, he was sunburnt, bruised, and thinner, but his heart was heavier with wisdom. And for the first time, the gates opened not for a king, but for a man ready to rule. The lean throne. The great palace was silent when King Barlo returned. Dust lay where servants once bustled. The halls, once echoing with clinking goblets and laughter, now felt hollow. But Barlo didn't flinch. He stepped through the gates, not as the man who left, but as one who had seen the world beyond velvet curtains. When the palace steward gasped upon seeing him, Barlo simply said, "I'm home. Gather the council." Within hours, his advisors sat in the war room, nervously watching their king. He looked different, leaner, quieter, but his presence felt heavier, as though he carried more than his own weight. "I owe you the truth," Barlo began. "I left this palace to see what we had become." An old minister leaned forward, brow furrowed. "Your Majesty, the realm suffered your absence. People were restless. They were suffering long before I left," Barlo replied. "We ignored it. I ignored it." He stood, pacing slowly. "I met farmers who eat once a day, children with sunken eyes, villages where silence has replaced joy. And in every face I saw a question. Where is our king?" A hush fell. Barlo turned toward the grand window, overlooking the city. "I feasted while they starved. I wore gold while they shivered. My throne was made of luxury, but it blinded me." He pointed at the throne. "Burn it. Today." The council gasped. A king's seat should remind him of duty, not comfort. When no one moved, Barlo barked now. By evening, the throne, a gaudy symbol of indulgence, was broken apart and cast into the furnace. In its place, carpenters from the city were summoned to build a new one, simple, strong, and made of oak. Barlo called it the lean throne. Over the next days, Gula transformed. Barlo cut court, spending by half. The kitchens, once private, opened to feed the poor. Royal jewels were sold to rebuild irrigation ditches and wells. Barlo walked the streets weekly, not in parade, but in listening. The nobles grumbled. "You're emptying the treasury," one warned. "I'm filling it with something more valuable. Trust," Barlo replied. He reappointed Mira, the healer he had once exiled, as royal steward of the people. She oversaw reforms, fair grain distribution, tax relief for farmers, and the reopening of village schools. Her name spread through the kingdom, not as a legend, but as proof that change was real. Still, not all were pleased. One night, an assassin slipped into the palace. He was caught just outside Barlo's chambers. Barlo confronted him. "Why?" the king asked. "My village rotted while your banquets grew louder. My sister died of hunger." This was justice. Barlo's eyes didn't harden. "Then strike," he said, stepping forward. "But know this, I now live for the people you speak of. I was blind. I'm not anymore." The assassin dropped the blade and wept. In time, the people's hatred cooled. A new kind of loyalty bloomed, one born not of fear, but of hope. Years passed. The fat king was remembered not for his size, but for his transformation. Statues weren't raised of his bulk or his battles, but of a man offering bread to a child in the dirt. The lean throne became a symbol passed from ruler to ruler, a reminder that power must be carried lightly. In his old age, Barlo stood beside Mira at a school opening. "Do you think they'll remember me kindly?" he asked. Mira looked at the children running through the gates. "They'll remember you honestly," she said. "And that's better than kindly." Barlo smiled, the lines of age and humility creasing his face. He had once ruled by appetite. Now he ruled by conscience. And in that transformation, he found a legacy far richer than gold.